So thank you very much to our panelists for the presentations. I'll now ask them to come up on the stage where we'll take some questions, and also we have one written question, or actually it's one written question with 3 parts. And after this, we'll just sort of open the floor for questions and discussions and comments. I think it's quite interesting. Between the 5 of us, a lot of us didn't know each other before the session, before we started planning this, and we realized very quickly that although we're coming from all different parts of the world, the challenges we're facing and the processes we're following are very much the same. And I think it's very motivating to see that it seems like we're all heading in the right direction. We're all heading in the same direction. We assume it's the right direction. Anyway, the written question isn't to anyone in particular, so I'll ask for one of you to volunteer to answer this. It's 3 parts. So depending on how the first question is answered, then we can move on to the second parts. But in summary, it's if you ever compare these community-based risk assessments with risk assessments done by experts or specialists, if you actually make this comparison, if you do, what are the results? Are they different? Are they the same? Are there some interesting disparities between them? And how do the communities themselves sort of deal with these differences, and do they understand why there are differences, and what kind of implications does that have? So I don't know if anyone wants to volunteer to answer that.
I can share one experience of comparing our results with the specialist results. Especially it was done for GTZ when one professional organization, NGO called GeoRisk, they were asked to implement hazard mapping in 2 regions of Armenia, and in the same time we did the vulnerability and capacity assessment in the same regions and in the same communities. The outcome was that after having these 2 results, the decision was like as the mathematical formulation shows risk, this is multiplication of hazard and vulnerability, to multiply the results of hazard assessment and vulnerability assessment. And as a result, the 2 organizations, we sit together and discussed how will we measure the hazard level and the vulnerability level to be close with the figures and the approach, and we selected the Richter scale for evaluating the vulnerability level. And as a result, what was the interesting that when they explain how they assess the community in terms of hazard and how they estimate the level of the hazard of being hazard prone, and how we did it for vulnerability, the results were very close. And in many cases we could prove them that they haven't considered this or that fact and didn't pay attention proper to this or that fact, and the same was in our case, but we reached a consensus and we used that like approximately same method for evaluation and get the final result of risk, like the risk index for each community, and in this way we define the most risky communities in these 2 regions. And this was our experience of being engaged with professional NGO in the risk assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Edmund. I have no other written questions, so if anyone out there has a question or comment, you're very welcome to come to the microphone here. I see one, 2, and then we'll move on after that. Please.
I had a question for the gentleman from Armenia. Was your work, did it focus on earthquakes primarily, or what other hazards and risks are you concerned with?
And this is mostly flood, mud flow, the most current, common disasters for our communities, and which are most usually happen in the communities and trigger their life.
So not earthquakes to a
No,
major
not
extent?
earthquake. In terms of earthquake, right now we are implementing project by the funding of DPECO, and this is called to raise people's awareness and preparedness, and through using non-structural mitigation approach to raise their preparedness to withstand earthquake. But this is not the assessment of the risk.
Yes, I would like to know is any of the project, any of the experience have any experience bringing technical expertise to the community from the national agencies, including the universities or professionals who could bring, they could lower the technical terminology at the level, no lower, just appropriate at the appropriate level of the community?
Manu, you can answer that? I think it's on.
Hello? Yeah. Well, yes, we, I mean, not as part of the risk assessment per se, but yes, there were several such efforts on how do we bridge this gap between the, the technical manpower and the technical knowledge and the communities who are facing the risk. I know Brian is somewhere in this room, and he was part of this process of doing shake table tests at community level, and these are usually high-end shake table tests done in, in pre-state conditions in labs and all. But we had to take this to the community to bring out this point about the importance of retrofitting, for example. And we did it using, very simple tools, and we built prototypes, and that's where I think the technical expertise really, struggled with simplifying all the terminologies they are used to using, and actually through a very live demonstration could convey a point about the need for safe buildings against earthquakes. So there have been very good examples, and sometimes one feels, being in a civil society organization throughout my education, after my education, I feel frustrated that there's not enough efforts being made of bringing technical expertise to the front lines. I think there is still a lot of mutual suspicion and some kind of, being in our silos that prevents this, and that's why I think disasters continue to happen.
Yeah, I'd like to add something from personal experience as well. Last year we had our first national workshop, which included representatives from the government, community people, representatives from the community, as well as civil society organizations. So basically, it was not premeditated, or we had not planned to do this, but our role ended up becoming the role of a facilitator between the technical experts and the community representatives. So we found ourselves kind of translating the language of scientists to the communities and vice versa. So I think civil society organizations also play a very big role in that.
Thank you, Maya and Manu. If I could ask the people coming to the microphone to introduce themselves. I know, Pablo, everybody knows you, but just in case there's a few unfortunate souls who don't know you.
Okay. Well, what will I say after that? My name is Pablo Suarez. I work with the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, and I'm also a researcher on a climate risk modeler. Building on what you said, Daniel, in the beginning, of the contrast between almost everything else happening in this event, which is very much technology-centered, versus here, which is very much people-centered. And we continue to see this gap that we're trying to bridge, and we celebrate everybody's presence here under the same roof. Two questions. One, especially for Nicole, because I'm involved in the upcoming Climate Outlook Forum for the Caribbean, and I hope you or someone from the team can join. But in one of the sessions earlier, there was climate modelers saying, we want to hear from users, what should we be forecasting in a day, in a week, in a season, or in a decade? What are the relevant questions? But we find that it's very difficult for practitioners to have a conversation with a scientist because there's different languages, there's different attitudes. So what would you like to ask the scientists to do if they want to invite you to converse with them? What can scientists do to better invite humanitarian sector to the conversation? That's question one. And the other one, possibly more for you, Daniel, but anyone is welcome to answer.
That's not allowed.
Okay, then whoever. Another one of the sessions today was about this crowdsourcing. How can we use newly available technologies, like punch some numbers in your cell phone and a blob pops up in a web page showing in what location someone is about to die or some help may be available. What are the institutional challenges that you encounter in trying to integrate new technologies into our decision-making, including decision-making for risk assessment, but also for actual action? How can we embrace technology if we are so people-centered, but technology can help?
The forecasting question is fairly straightforward. Communities, they want to know how what you are forecasting will affect them. But the problem with scientists is they stop at the forecasting. And you do a great forecast, but how's that helping me down the road? Where's the solution to the forecast? You know, you go, oh, we're going to have a drought. Good news. You know? Yeah, and how's that helping me? What's the mitigation strategy to help me with this drought, to protect my livelihood? And we need to get to the other part of that question. Because right now all we're talking about is the research and not about the solution. And that's where we need to be.
Does anybody else want to contribute to that?
And also, to answer to the question, in many cases, the many of us mentioned here that education, awareness raising, all this directed to the next generation to solve the problem, to make the disaster risk reduction as like component of our usual life. But we should consider that communities are not prepared to think about this now, because they are mostly concentrated on their social and economical problems, and it's very difficult to convince them to think about something which can happen after 10 or 20 years.
Please go ahead.
I just wanted to answer Pablo's first question. I think one of the ways forward in terms of getting the scientists to invite humanitarians like us on a common sort of talking table is, you know, through these alliances, which are now becoming much more of a comfortable medium. Because, you know, this kind of enabling dialogue does not happen overnight. It does not happen in one meeting. It takes its time to understand and to be able to respect each other's point of view. And therefore, you know, having sustained relationships, having areas where you know, you anchor your collaboration needs to be put in place when we are doing the you know, this kind of alliance and bridge building. But that's one way. I mean, I don't have the full answer for this perhaps, but this is one way where we find a good potential of you know, going in.
Before I give an answer to the second question, does anybody else want to answer that one or not? Otherwise, okay.
Let me take the mic again. I think you know, the embracing this technology won't really change the equations per se. I mean, the equations about, you know, the governments looking at local community-based assessments with suspicion and, you know, all that. What technology would really do, and that is where we struggled in as part of the view from the front line, is increasing the coverage areas. Knowing very well that we are working with very crude indicators for resilience, this kind of technologies actually help us widen the search. In India, with, you know, almost 1 billion plus population, we could cover only a very, very small 0.0001 kind of percentage of people. And that, I guess, you know, when we you know, scale it up to globally, it's hardly a percentage to be, you know, taken into account. But that's where I think technology can do its bit. But and if that cascades into, you know, more credible sort of results in terms of saying to the decision makers, look here, we have now 1 million people saying this to you, then perhaps that would help in doing. In terms of anchoring, I think it has to be somewhere in a neutral ground. And again, I think Maya's point about civil societies organizations acting as anchors or facilitators would be something which needs to be, worked upon. And that's where the potential is, in my opinion.
And I'll just give a brief answer from the IFRC perspective on Pablo's second question. I think the main challenge we have institutionally in really embracing these new technologies is mostly a lack of understanding and recognition of how they work, what they are, and the power that they can have. Using the example of IFRC, we use sort of social networking to get our message out, but the idea of getting the message back in through the same technology somehow isn't really filtered very far yet. But I think we're starting to get some real-world examples from our own experiences in Haiti, for example. During our response operations, we had an agreement with Voila, which is, I think, one of the main cell phone providers, mobile phone providers, and it was quite useful in helping us to target our response and relief work. So I think there's a growing recognition that we need to do more in this area, but we are a large network of national societies and a big bureaucracy in a sense, so things tend to move a bit slowly, but hopefully there'll be progress. Anyway, next question, please.
Hi, thanks for the presentations. My name is Zoe Trahanis, and I work here at the World Bank in the East Asia and Pacific region. And many of you touched in your presentations a bit, but I was hoping to get some more information on engagement with local government, because it's come up, but I think this is a big gap in many cases, because obviously communities can do a lot themselves and can take initiative, but in terms of sustainability, and of course with your help, but sustainability and policy decisions and development planning, budgeting is the job of the government. So maybe you could talk a bit more about, how you've tried, and it definitely from the Lebanon case that came across that was being done, but maybe to hear a bit more about what you're doing and what are some lessons maybe that we can take away. Because I know I've been working in Indonesia. There's an urban poverty program, and we've been trying to integrate DRR into community approaches. But that was through an existing CDD program, and it's a bit more challenging to go in at the community level where there aren't these types of programs and focus on DRR. Thanks.
The interesting thing about the Lebanon case, when we did the Views from the Frontline project, is that there was a lot of engagement by the local government representatives. They acknowledged that they didn't have the resources. They also acknowledged that they didn't have any disaster risk management planning in any of their development policies. But they said that they were willing to be actively engaged in any of the initiatives proposed by civil society organizations. And what actually happened is that now with the disaster risk management committees that we have facilitated in the different areas, we do have local government representatives. The big challenge here, though, is they always refer to the central government for budgeting, for major decision making. So what's happening now is that they're still pretty much dependent on civil society for initiatives rather than the central government, because central government unfortunately hasn't prioritized DRR yet. So yeah. That's what we're facing for the moment.
Nicole?
I want to endorse everything Maya has just said. The programs generally try to engage the local government participants in the debate, but they actually come to you with a sense of, we're so glad you're doing this because we can't do it ourselves. And so what we try to do is, if the micro projects come up, then we get the local government engineers to endorse it, and even provide the technical support for it. And they're glad because they knew the work had to be done. They just didn't have the budget to do it. And you all in the World Bank would know better than us that when you look at the GDP to debt in many of the countries that we work in, they're really challenged for resources. So it would be nice to get some of those resources down at the community level.
Just to add from my experience working with local authorities, sometimes they looks like kids and they are waiting for some sweets. And sweets for them, this is these micro projects. And whenever you are entering communities, like just for preparedness measures, for assessment, and like many of them can say that, but why do we need it now? Now let's spend this money for mitigation to build a dike, to clean a river bank and whatever. And when you are trying to convince and explain them that this is one of the activities of the risk reduction, but we are not here to provide you with money or technical support. We are here to raise your capacities in terms of your preparedness and like awareness of the general population to help you to establish disaster risk management mechanisms in place. And like the micro projects, this is one of our, like how to say, our advantage which we are providing you to encourage you and to attract your attention to this project. But this is not common for all, but we face really such a problems. And for like as for World Bank, it's my personal experience that it's important to secure some funding within disaster community level disaster risk reduction projects for mitigation activities. It should be co-funded by the communities or by other stakeholders, I'm sure, but there should be some funds for this activity.
Thank you. We can have the next question, please.
I am Paolo Gasparini from the University of Napoli. I worked for many years and working since many years on the problems of early warnings, especially of earthquakes, but also of other natural disasters. And so I want to address one question concerning the early warning and in general the forecasting problem. In my experience, I found that the greatest obstacle to the application of early warning methodologies is the problem of false alarms. Any early warning or early forecasting has a probability of false alarm that's not very low. And there are many countries where early warning is not considered in any law, in any legislation. This leads to a very difficult situation because decision makers and administrators are quite reluctant to make warnings or to accept forecasting from scientists because of this problem of liability and responsibilities. So I think this is the main obstacle in the application of early warning. Of course, a community-based early warning can help administrators to take decisions on that because, for instance, people well informed will know that there is a probability of false alarm, and so there will be no distrust for future early warning. But anyway, I think one major problem is the legal problem. I want to know, in your experience, how this is dealt with, and if it's solved in some of your countries.
Anybody want to volunteer?
I would like to share our experience in terms of early warning. I'm not sure with earthquakes, but we work when we work in terms of floods and mostly floods. What we propose to communities, we are proposing them the in-community early warning mechanisms, because early warning contains from several steps, and the last one, this is how and this warning and through which pipes will get the community and how this information will spread within the community, and will be this just information about some occasion, or this will be continued with instructions what to do and how to do. And like in our context in Armenia, at the beginning it was very interesting because all the officials, like, they were against of this idea, saying that we have early warning and we inform from region to communities about this or that threat. But when we raise the question, what's then? Community leader, this is one person and this is not entire community. What's then? How community reacts to this information? And there is nothing. And what we propose them to use the different mechanisms, starting from church bells, starting from focal points for certain areas, like the one of the proposals was also related to forecasting, to have a focal point within the community, because like we mentioned that there are communities who even haven't electricity, and like internet connection, the computer, this is not common for all communities. And to use even each community has 1 or 2 or 3 computers, to use existence of this capacity at place and to give a forecast, to spread a forecast within the community. This is from our experience, and we developed some chart showing the in-community early warning mechanisms, and we provide it to communities and make them committed to continue this, to follow this.
Thank you, Edmund. Manu, you have something to add?
Well, I don't think I have the answer for this, because this is a serious problem, and I completely agree with you, sir, that we are grappling with this on a daily basis. I've worked with communities who are living in squatter colonies within the riverbanks, and every time there is heavy rains, we have an opposite situation to what you described, sir, where actually the governments go on an overdrive because they don't want to be seen to have not heeded the warning. They force evacuate, even call the army if they require and 9 times out of 10 there are no floods, So the community is kind of, looks at government initiated warnings with a lot of suspicion, and obviously they don't want to move out. But what worked in that particular community was, as Edmond described, visible signs of lurking danger. And in this particular case, community had its own ways of assessing the high flood level. And when there was a warning upstream, there was a network of whatever telephone calls or where they warned their downstream communities that the flood levels are rising, and that's what convinced communities better. So I guess I'm just reinforcing the answers which my colleagues gave. It's about having a combination, how governments could also look at the community's ways of understanding and believing in real risks, and then working on that.
Thank you, Manu. I think in the interest of time, I'd like to limit to the last 2 questions, the 2 people standing there, because I also have 2 more written questions I've received. So please.
Olga Wilhelmi, MCAR. Thanks very much for your presentations. It was really interesting to hear about it. My question is about sort of resources. For example, if somebody is interested in conducting community-based assessment, where they would go? Are there any sort of information in terms of best practices for conducting community-based risk assessment, or success stories in implementation of those assessments for building resilient communities? Are there any resources that would be available either through Red Cross or World Bank that would be helpful for communities who would like to engage in the process?
I can answer that partially, but if you go ahead, Maya.
Yeah, I think I can speak on behalf of the Global Network for Disaster Reduction, and Manu, if you have anything to add. Part of the success of the Global Network for Disaster Reduction is being able to voice out the opinion of the different civil society organizations in over 40 countries on risk perceptions of communities and on results of community-based risk assessments, and on the discussion of best practices as well, which are posted on the Global Network for Disaster Reduction website. And the website itself also encourages blog discussions and is open for anyone. And whoever wants to access the website can actually get in there and be part of the blogs and discussions, and can even access some of the resources that were posted there on some community-based risk assessments. I hope I answered your question.
And if I could, I'll just add to that briefly. From the Red Cross tool, the VCA Vulnerability and Capacity Assessment, there's a lot of guidance material and it's on our website. If you can't find it, just email me. And also, if you go to the website of the Prevention Consortium, which is now defunct, but there's still a lot of good information on the website, there's a community risk assessment toolkit which brings together all sorts of different approaches and different guidance materials from the Red Cross, from NGOs, from all sorts of civil society organizations. So there's a lot out there, just a matter of finding it. Next question, please.
Hello, my name is Mike Buckley, and just finished a 30-year career with FEMA, now in a consulting capacity. But I worked in hazard identification and hazard mitigation for that time. And one of the things that we noticed in this country is when there's a disaster, that many of the businesses, especially some of the small businesses, a large percentage of them never really reopen. So the business community has a big stake in this whole issue of hazard mitigation, understanding their risk and so forth. Would like for you to comment on how you engaged with the business communities in your efforts. Thank you.
Yeah, I have two examples to share with you. Of course, more information is available on the respective websites. But in New Delhi, where I stayed, we worked with the scrap dealers who recycle waste, and they have major stakes in in this kind of scenarios. And therefore, they actually came about together to actually erect fire posts in their own community without even waiting for the local fire stations to act. So yes, I agree with you completely. They have big stakes, and perhaps they are the best kind of leaders for local level risk reduction initiatives in urban areas, particularly. A similar example is in Philippines. In many of the smaller cities, the shopkeepers came together to find solutions for local flooding problems, because that closed down their businesses for sufficient periods of time every year, and that obviously affected their incomes. So there are a lot of such good examples at local level, but it hasn't really sort of bubbled up to major sort of aggregation of such businesses who are looking at risks to natural disasters yet.
Okay, if there's no other comments, actually I have a quick example too from Sudan actually. Some years ago the Sudanese Red Crescent worked together with Coca-Cola Sudan on doing a risk assessment, because Coca-Cola recognized while their facilities weren't at risk, when it floods, their employees couldn't come to work and the company lost money. So obviously there's a clear economic incentive there, and they worked with Sudanese Red Crescent to understand where the risk is and to help find ways of protecting their own employees. So there are some initiatives happening out there, but I think as Manu said, it needs to bubble up a bit more at the grassroots level. So, to our last two questions. First we have a question for Nicole, which is, how do you actually explain tsunami wave attenuation to people who have not experienced a tsunami? Microphone, can you use?
I don't. Basically, I think SODIMA just recently brought out, along with the Seismic Research Unit, a very simple guidance for communities, which says if you feel it, run. Yeah? We're not even trying to explain it. We're just trying to tell people what to do to be safe when it happens. So there's some simple posters and radio ads and things like that that they're sharing with the community that says basically if you feel the earthquake, don't wait to be told, run. Yeah? And they show you what direction to run to, which is very interesting. So you run in the right direction.
Okay. And Maya, you're the lucky winner of the last question. Question is, can community engagement in risk assessment heal political, religious, and social divides?
Wow. Tough question. Actually, I can look at this from one perspective. As you might know, we have a very diverse society. We have a lot of political affiliations and religious denominations in a very small country. So we always face divide among communities wherever we work. The very interesting thing about risk assessments is the communities we engaged themselves were quite heterogeneous. So they were all from different political and religious backgrounds. And that risk assessment and the fact that they were part of providing recommendations for future disaster risk reduction initiatives was a connector for people from different social, religious, and political backgrounds. So I don't know if I answered your question, but yes, they found a common denominator, which is basically reducing risks in their communities, regardless of their political, social, and religious divide. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mai. I think that's a very inspiring note to end on. I want to thank all of you for coming to this decidedly non-technical session. I'm happy to see the interest is there, so that's great. And just to give a final round of applause to our excellent panelists.